Everyone, welcome to the Gene Gem podcast. My name is Kolbe, and today I'm here with
Jayla.
So Jayla, how are you today?
I'm good. A little tired from my workout yesterday.
Oh, that's right, you did a workout. Speaking of workouts, that reminded me of how recently in class we've been discussing and reading about this book called The Sports Gene. So Jayla, what do you think of the book so far? Do you think it's interesting, credible? What are your thoughts?
Well, for one thing, I would say I found it really interesting how all of the athletes are so familiar with their sports. For example, eyesight, photographic memory, body types. I also liked how it included science and genetics. Everything really amazes me, but the one thing I found the most interesting that really grabbed my attention was in chapter 15, when I read about heart disease called HCM found in athletes. HCM is a very serious disease that is constantly affecting athletes today.
You know, Jayla, I would have to agree with you on that one. This disease called HCM really grabbed my attention as well. I mean, it was crazy to read about what happened to Kevin during his race. While I was reading this, I started to wonder, how does HCM affect athletes, and how does it restrict them from doing what they love?
Well, after reading about HCM, I really wanted to look into it more, and I found out that in the book on page 254, it stated, Kevin has a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or HCM, a genetic disease that causes the walls of the left ventricle to thicken, such as that it does not relax completely between beats, and impede blood flow into the heart itself.
Wait, so when we're looking at Kevin, the reason his body just slowly shut down was because he wasn't getting the oxygen his body needs in order to run and operate, correct?
Yes, basically his heart became too big and made it hard for him to get oxygen, which is a key part of the human body to run. I also think this can happen with many other athletes as well. It can restrict them from working out or playing sports. I think athletes could find ways to modify the intensity level, but this disease could scare them out of doing what they love. What do you think about this? Do you agree?
I do agree. I also read in the book on page 246 that statistics found that a high school student or pro college athlete with HCM can drop dead somewhere in the US every other week. I think that after reading this, I feel like athletes need to be careful with what they do if they have HCM so that athletes can prevent this.
It shocks me how common this disease is. I've never really heard of it, but I just found out how serious HCM can be. After researching treatments and diagnoses, I found that this disease is not easily treated. The only main ways to treat HCM is a medication called mavacamten. Mavacamten helps control the heart from squeezing so hard. You can either use this medication or you can resort to surgery. However, even doing these procedures, athletes are still at risk from being fatally injured when doing workouts. If their blood pressure gets too high, it could result in their body shutting down.
I would have to agree. I also found that HCM is very hard to treat, and I think that this is kind of crazy because so many athletes have died from HCM, so I don't really understand how this isn't a bigger issue. But another way I found that you can prevent HCM is to manage how much activity your body is doing. So maybe extracurriculars is not such a great idea for people with HCM. In the book on page 249, it said cardiologists who study HCM recommend that people with the disease abstain from rigorous activity. Because of rigorous activity, it can increase adrenaline that may spark a deadly rhythm. After reading this, I think it mainly states how it can affect people from doing what they love. It simply affects them because they have to manage how much they work out and how hard their workouts or activities are. I think it can really impact athletes because athletes might be stressed out from having HCM and might make them feel a little deflated.
Yes, I 100% agree. I don't know what I would do if I couldn't cheer, if I had HCM. So it must be really hard to keep on living a normal life when you know that you have a heart disease and you can't work out or do sports as much as any other person. Hopefully in the future, there will be simpler cures for HCM disease that allow athletes to do what they love without having the fear of their body shutting down.
So I totally agree. And I mean, it must be very hard for Kevin's parents to go through that, especially because his mom had a feeling that there was something wrong when he overslept in the morning before his race. I mean, I couldn't even imagine if that was my own son and I knew something was wrong and later finding out that my son died from HCM.
I feel the same way. On the topic of Kevin and his mother, I had another question. How do you know if you have HCM as an athlete or a person?
Well, Jayla, I think that's a great question because honestly, I was wondering the same thing. I mean, as an athlete myself, how would I even know if I had HCM? Are there signs of it? or is it more just like you have to get a test done, or what? After doing research about this, I found out that some people experience chest pain or even fainting while working out, which could be a sign of HCM.
Well, that would make sense because after reading about HCM, we both found out that HCM enlarges your heart. So if you're experiencing chest pain, I can see why that might be a sign of HCM.
Yes, and I also found out that some people can have a blood test done to see if they have a genetic mutation linked from their parents that could lead to HCM.
I think that is really interesting because I actually read in the book about a genetic mutation that can lead to HCM. In the book, on page 247, it stated, "The most common cause of HCM is a DNA spelling error known as a missense mutation."
Yes, I also read that, and I also found out that a missense mutation occurs when a single genetic code is swapped, which can lead to a change in the amino acid.
I feel like this is a familiar topic to me because we were just learning about DNA replication in biology class. And now this book is talking about genetics and how certain diseases can come from an error in DNA replication. It's crazy to me how one small part of your genetics can cause such a big harm.
Yes, and this also made me wonder, did Kevin's sleep schedule have to do with HCM, or was it a coincidence that he slept in?
Well, after some research, I found out that some people tend to sleep longer when having HCM because their heart is tired from working so hard to keep someone alive. So the reason Kevin must have slept in is because his heart was working overtime.
Well, that would make sense, especially because for people who work out a lot or do extracurriculars, their heart is constantly working all the time and needs a break. So people with HCM have to try to be very cautious with what they do and maybe even get extra rest to prevent heart failure.
I completely agree. After learning so much about HCM from the sports gene and from exercise science, I'm glad we were able to make our podcast and inform others about HCM.
Thanks for listening. This concludes the Gene Jam podcast.